Okay, we'll start this over. Hopefully, we can get this thing done. Moses, you notice the dates 1440 to 1290. That is one of the things we're going to address. But before we get there, I want to look at this reasoning and history. Okay, history is based on observations. And so we'll observe something like Amenhotep changed his name to Akhenaten. His son Tutankhaten changed his name to Tutankhamun. Okay, and then we might notice other signs like or patterns, like the Aten is removed from a lot of the structures and stories and stuff. And so then we can start to say, okay, why is this happening? And we'll develop a hypothesis, and we'll say that Aten gained power and then lost power, and that's why we have these name changes. We have these things being erased, and so our theory is there was a power struggle that involved religion. Pretty easy, okay, and that we would extend that to Akhenaten and Tutankhamun and how they may have interacted with the priests. Okay, that is a historical reasoning model. Now, what this is inductive reasoning. We see something, we notice patterns, and we develop ideas to generalize our observations to a broader rule. It's open-ended. It leads us to a theory, but it doesn't lead us to fact. There will be other theories that we could deal with when we look at the Aten. Okay, there could be something totally different that we're missing, but we take a specific instance and we try to go to a broader rule. Okay, that is inductive reasoning. Okay, when you go to science begins with a theory. And so I have here plants are exposed to 5 hours of sunlight a day will not grow as well as plants exposed to sunlight for 14 hours a day. Okay, so we develop a hypothesis. Sunlight is a necessary part of plant growth. Then we'll do our observations. We grow some plants. Okay, we really watch the variables. We control. We have a control group. We keep some plants with 5 hours of sunlight. We do other plants with 14 hours of sunlight. We make sure that they have the same dirt, same water, everything else is the same. And that's how we control the variables to make sure we're looking at sunlight only. At the end of our experiment, we measure the plants at specific points in time to see how they're growing. Okay, and we will come up with data, facts that we can say, okay, this is what happens when you expose plants to sunlight. Now, this results are will either confirm our theory or they won't. Now, in history, if you go about it this way, it may not be confirmable. Okay, in the social sciences, it is difficult because you can't really have a control group. There aren't ways that you can go about it. One thing I can think of is with this. Let me look at this one first. That's deductive reasoning. This is where you go from a theory, hypothesis, observations, all the way to your confirmation. And your results can be tested and again and again, and they are facts. Okay. Now, in history, it is difficult to get to this because you can't have a control group. Typically, a civilization is a civilization on its own, and you can't measure one variable. Now, in history, too, we'll come up with a story. One great story is Homer, the Odyssey. And in Homer, the Odyssey, there's a city named Troy, and Troy is destroyed by the other Greeks. Now, an archaeologist used the stories and the descriptions of the landforms to track down a city that he calls Troy because he followed the directions that Homer led or gave in the stories, followed it up to a specific spot, started digging, and found a destroyed city. Now, is it Troy? It might be. Is it 100% for sure Troy? Not 100% for sure. Okay, so when we deal with social studies, archaeology, history, it's very difficult to use deductive reasoning. It's not something that is very well, that you can't demonstrate those as facts. Now, if there's data there, perhaps we can get facts. And we'll have to look at data later on, not quite yet. Now, biblical archaeology. Okay, biblical archaeology is a lot like Schliemann looking for the city of Troy. Okay, Homer had history in his book, The Odyssey and the Iliad, but it is not history. Okay, there are not really Greek gods that are playing with people. Just like the Bible contains history, but the Bible is not history. Okay, we do have real historical people in the Bible and real historical events in the Bible, but not every event or every person could be confirmed, especially as it's written. And so we have to look at it very cautiously. Now, when we link the Bible to history, okay, we can't just take one source and go with it. We have to find other sources that verify. Later on, we'll talk about the first mention of the Israelis in Egypt was, I think, 1207 BCE. Before then, they weren't mentioned. And so, we may not know exactly everything about the Israelis because we don't have other sources to compare against. Now, one way to look at the Bible is maybe look at it as literature. But when you look at it as literature, it's going to be the same type of thing. We use it as, we can learn our stories from it, but it might take the same type of inductive reasoning that it takes to study history. And there I gave you an answer. Don't tell anybody. Now, when we look at Moses, and that's what we're trying to track down, right? We're trying to track down Moses. We have to establish a timeline in some ways. Now, Moses, right now, there aren't any archaeological facts that tie Moses to anything. Now, there are a bunch of stories about Moses. And did Moses exist? Probably so. Is Moses one person or two? Do not know. I don't know. It'd be tough to say. There's going to be some things that really throw us off. Now, when we look at the stories of Abraham, we talked about Abraham last time, but his son is Isaac. Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob is the receiver of the birthright. Now, even though those are twin boys, and Jacob is the second born, so typically it is the primary or the firstborn son that receives the birthright. But for some reason, Jacob and his mom, Rebecca, believed that he should receive it. I think an angel king told him that he would be the recipient of the birthright. We won't go through all the stories, but Jacob gets the birthright. Okay, so he inherits his dad's blessings and land and everything else. Now, David, he goes back to Ur, just like his father Isaac did. And as he goes back to Ur, he falls in love with a young girl named Rachel, and he works out a deal with the father Laban to earn Rachel. And so he works for 7 years to get her. When he goes to marry her, he marries Leah instead. So when she removes the veil, it is Rachel's sister Leah. So Jacob works another 7 years to win or to earn the right to marry Rachel. Eventually, 14 years later, he marries Rachel as well. Now, he moves back to Canaan. Now, when we look at this, this is the origin of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob has 12 sons down here. Most of them are from his first wife, Leah. Now, Rachel, she has a couple of kids too, but they are his youngest sons. If you notice too, he has a couple of servants that he has children with. Now, these could be concubines or secondary wives, but they do have kids with Jacob. Now, when we look at in the story of Joseph, it goes, and I'll tell you very quickly. The other brothers were jealous of Joseph and Benjamin, and there's a story about a coat of many colors that Joseph had worn to show his dad had made for him, and it showed his dad's favoritism. And his brothers met him out while he was herding a flock of sheep one day, and they decided to kill him. But instead of killing him, they went, you know what, let's not kill him, let's sell him into slavery, because a caravan was passing by, and so they sold Joseph into slavery, and he was taken down into Egypt, where he was a slave. Now, years later, there's another famine in the land of Canaan, and his brothers migrate down to Egypt, and they discover, or Joseph knows who they are and discovers them. He does some tests with them to see if they have passed or matured, He plants a cup, I believe, in the bag of Benjamin to see if they will defend Benjamin or let Benjamin swing for being his dad's favorite. The brothers pass the test, and so Joseph identifies himself as their long lost brother. Now, at that time, they migrate en masse all the way down to Egypt to avoid the famine in Canaan. So 70 people move down. Now, in one part of the Bible, Exodus 12:40, it says that there were, I believe, 12 generations between the time. Wait, no, that's something else. It said there was 430 years between the time they migrated to Egypt and the time that Moses led the people out on the Exodus. We'll cover that probably by the next time. Now, this is difficult to gauge, and we're just trying to figure out when some of these things could happen so we can match it up with other points in history, because right now we don't even know where to look for Moses in history or Abraham or any of these other people. Now, another source states that it was only 2 or 3 generations after these 70 people moved down from Egypt that they went on the Exodus. And that is based on Numbers 26:8 and 9 and Genesis 46:9. They mentioned 2 guys, Dotham and Abiram, and they are listed as the grandsons of Palu, one of the original 70 people that migrated down. And so when we look at the Bible, this is one of the points. It contradicts itself. It doesn't have a clear timeline, and so you can't take it as history because there are different points in the Bible that will not say the same things. They're different stories, or they're written by different people. They emphasize different points, that sort of thing. And so it's difficult to take the Bible straight as history. Again, it's only one source. We've got to look at other sources to confirm what we have. Now, another problem with dating Moses is trying to find out in Egypt where he may have been located. Now, one date that is referred to in the Bible is 1440 BCE. And we get this date because in one of the books of the Bible, it says it happened 480 years before Solomon's reign. Now, Solomon was the primary king of Egypt, not Egypt, but of Israel. And Solomon is the son of David. He is the 3rd king of Israel. He is seen as the pinnacle or the peak of Israeli life. And so we go back 480 years, and that gives us about 1440. Now, if it is 1440, the pharaoh at that time would have been Tutmosis. Again, Tutmosis, his name means Thoth has risen, or Thoth is born, because the word Moses means born or son. And so, if you remember, Tutmosis III was a stepson of Hatshepsut, one of the female pharaohs. So this is a difficult dating because we are not sure. Now, another thing, this is based on 12 generations. That's what they say. 12 generations from Moses to Solomon, but they give 40 years for a generation. And that's difficult. Now, typically nowadays, I would say 20 to 25 years is a generation. I'm not sure what generation you guys are right now, but it is, several generations removed from what I was raised. Now, another date, if you give 25 years as a generation, that will give you to 1290 BCE. And that is the rise of the 19th dynasty, the one we just started to look at. And that would be Seti the First, and he would be the brother of Ramses, Ra, Moses. So son of Ra, or Ra has risen. And I got to put that in there on that slide. So the brother Ramses. Now we have a couple of things to look at to see if the story of Moses lines up with any of the historical data that we already know about Egypt. And this is very difficult because it's tough to find. Now, the story of Moses, I'm only going to go through the first 80 years because the next 40 years are going to be very important, and that is really what sets up the Jewish belief system. Okay. Now, Moses was the third son of a family called of Amram and Jochebed. He had a sister named Miriam and a brother named Aaron. Now, at this time, the time that Moses was born, there was a decree uh, by the Pharaoh that any Hebrew, any Jewish person should be killed at birth up to a certain age because there were too many of them. He didn't want to have a slave revolt. And so, one way to do that was to eliminate the boys from certain age groups, just take them out. And so, his mom takes the baby, puts him in a little basket boat, puts him on the Nile River. And his sister Miriam is set out there to watch the basket boat to make sure everything's okay. So she's kind of babysitting, but watching this basket. It's hidden in the rushes where no one will find it. But the basket is discovered by the princess, the Pharaoh's daughter, and she says, I want this kid to be my own. And so she raises Moses as her own. And since she is not a natural mother, she has to hire a wet nurse, which is Jochebed. So Jochebed works as Moses' mom, and she trains him in the Hebrew ways. But when he gets to a certain age, he is returned to the Pharaoh's daughter, and he's raised in the court of Egypt for about the first 40 years of his life. Now, at some point in that 40-year span, he, while inspecting the Egyptian countryside and inspecting the work groups going on, he saw an Egyptian overlord beating a Hebrew slave, and Moses secretly or jumps down and kills that overlord, making sure he's not seen. But the next day, he sees a couple of Hebrews fighting, and he tries to intervene. And Hebrews look at him and say, "Are you going to kill one of us like you did that overlord the other day?" And so Moses knows he's been found out, and so he flees. He flees north and east toward Saudi Arabia, current day Saudi Arabia, toward Canaan, and he comes into the land of the Medians. Now, in the land of the Medians, he runs into a man named Jethro, and Jethro has these daughters, and he works for Jethro, raising the flock. Okay, he is a shepherd for Jethro, and he actually marries one of Jethro's daughters, so he has his wife. Now he works out there for 40 years. Okay, he's just a shepherd for 40 years, but in that time frame, his attitude has changed. He's become much more of a mature person, more regulated in his beliefs, more regulated in his behaviors, and comes to a point where he's out shepherding the flocks and he sees a bush burning, but the bush is not going away. It just continues to burn. And so he walks up to the bush, and the bush starts to talk to him. The bush tells him to take off his sandals because where he is, it's holy ground. And he goes up to the bush and listens to it. Now the bush tells him that he needs to go back and save the Hebrew people from Egyptian slavery. And Moses asks him, "Who am I going to say sent me?" And the bush says, "I am who I am," which is Yahweh in Hebrew. And so from then on, the Hebrew God is known as Yahweh instead of El. And so that is where we'll leave the story right now. Again, these are all biblical sources, the Torah, the Bible. There aren't any archaeological sources on Moses. There's Hebrew tradition. Tradition just says this happened. We aren't sure, but these stories were passed down for generations, 3,000 years. Okay. Oh, there's Moses in the burning bush. I should have brought that up earlier. And then discussion. Have you noticed any patterns in the way Mr. T teaches history? What theories do your observations lead you to? Think about it. What type of observations do you have? What theories do you have about my teaching or topics I teach or how I teach? Love talking to you guys about it. See you this afternoon. Take care.